Deputy Shane Cassells, 15 minutes.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach, and welcome to Mr Dollard and the team. As Mr Dollard said, we're here to discuss the financial accounts and the financial position of the board, in particular the viability of the financial future of Bord na Gan. And in the board members' report, the section on principal commercial activity sets out the main funding for Bord na Gan and how it's sourced into 5 different categories. Admission fees, bar and restaurant, the tote, levy on the bookies, and exchequer funding was listed as 5. Now, I find it strange that the 16 million, or as you said this year, the 16.8 million from the exchequer is mentioned last, given that it dwarfs most of the other sources of funding. And as I said, it's some 16.8 million is what Bord na Gan gets. That's €323,000 a week. That's €46,000 a day. 46 grand a day. And that's up 2 million since 2016, or an additional 39 grand a week. And I know that the funding that the dogs get sticks in the craw of many people, given that I have poor unfortunates who have been told there's no money for home help for their loved ones, or this week being told by Fianna McGrath that there's no money for a respite centre in a buy in my constituency. But this set of accounts for the Greyhound Board records an increase of 2 million for greyhounds, and the funding from the state is only referenced last in the annual report. So let us look at the income and expenditure, because what's quite evident is that without that 16.8 million, greyhound raising operations would not be viable. I'm going to answer Deputy Farrell's question. They wouldn't be viable. You'd be goosed. You'd be goosed. And it begs the larger question of such massive state subvention in the first place. So on the income side, because for most sporting organisations, and I was a sports journalist for 15 years, for most sporting organisations, the people coming through the turnstiles are the largest part of their income, and they're a good barometer of public sentiment as well for the organisation. So let's look at the attendance figures. The ordinary Irish people coming through the various 17 tracks that are across the country. 2016, 636,914 people came through. 2017, and I acknowledge there was difficulties that year, that dropped to 514,500 people for the year. And last year, it dropped to 506,000 for the year. And I've looked, and that was with an increase on the number of race meetings actually held in 2017, but a decrease coming through the turnstiles of some 130,000 now, a drop in 3 years, and that is quite substantial. And you're a new CEO and you're trying to reform, and I'm sure you would admit that is quite substantial. An average attendance is so at the track would be 319 persons per meeting in 2018. 319. 319. There'd be more people at a cricket match in Malahide, and the Irish Cricket Union doesn't get the colour of 16.8 million. 319. I have 321 people waiting on home help in Meath. So I have more people waiting for home help than there is at the average attendances here. So it's galling to me. I think the industry has some neck into being in receipt of 16.8 million state support with such low public support. An average attendance of 319. So my question on these figures, if the industry continues to hemorrhage public support, which is evident with a drop of 130,000 people in 3 years, does there need to be a reappraisal? So my 3 questions. 1, does there need to be a reappraisal of the level of government support? Because quite simply, the Exchequer can't be expected to prop up a failing industry if income is falling on one side. And you've clarified that there's a 2 million increase in state subvention since 2016, 14.8 to 16.8. 2, have Bord na Gan approached the Department of Agriculture in terms of that request for increased state support, either by way of correspondence, meetings held formally, informally with Minister Andrew Doyle, and given the trends in income that we have seen, will there be requests for further support as well? And 3, on the attendance figures, and you alluded to the fact that Shelbourne Park was performing strongly in the first half of the year before the RTE expose. How have the other tracks performed in that same first 6-month period? And in terms of the 20% drop on average across attendances, was there a higher spike in some tracks than others? Just my first 3 questions. Go here, Loch.
Thanks, Deputy, and I suppose to the Chair, just to take those issues as they've been raised. First comment I'd make is that the greyhound racing, it's a greyhound industry, and I've mentioned the Jim Power economic report. It is a significant industry. It does add significant value to the economy, and there's 12,371 people that derive economic benefits. So there is a constituency out there that it is their job, it is their life, and it is what they depend on. On the other side, income does come into the state through the betting levy. It does come into the state through the taxing PRSI of those people who are involved in the industry. So there is 2 sides to the argument. Does it require a reappraisal of government support? I think that's a policy question of government. The greyhound racing industry is a legitimate industry. People are entitled to be part of it. They are entitled to enjoy it. Has there been a request for increasing state support? The Board in Nagon has made no request for increasing state support. Although, as I referred to earlier, we are on a significant change and reform agenda. There will be investments required, and certainly I would think any reduction in the current support would cause difficulties in terms of the overall programme for care and welfare in particular. And I think the final question was, will there be further support required down the line? And that brings us back to the Indicon study. I think the Indicon study really is hopefully going to offer a blueprint as to what is the financially sustainable industry footprint to the future. And I think when that report is available, all parties, including the Board and Government, will have to consider whatever recommendations it contains. Sorry, you also asked about other stadia, which down in terms of numbers. If I could just get the June figures. If you look at the 2018 data, I'm not sure if it's in the briefing note, but the biggest reduction, our own stadia actually showed an increase in attendance. The biggest reduction was in the private stadia. I did mention Shelbourne in the first 6 months showed an increase. Curraheen Park showed a small increase. Mullingar showed an increase. Youghal, minor increase, but the most significant increase was in Shelbourne Park.
I never questioned the legitimacy of our industry. Never said that. Never questioned the legitimacy of the industry. And I'm fully aware of how the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund is operated. But not every tax raised in this country, whether it be on motor taxation, whether it be on it, goes then directly back into the sector in which it is pulled out of. So I'll put that on the record as well. On the individual tracks, if you can take me through the viability of the tracks, because the last time the Board were here, the big talking point was the sale of Harold's Cross, which of course, hey presto, was amazingly sold to the Department of Education for 23 million and was the exact same that the Board was in debt. But given that such a sale is not something that can happen every year, the business model, so that such a position is not revisited, is crucial. So we've just discussed the issue of the drop, and I did ask you in terms of addressing the fact that notwithstanding small increases at the start of this year, there's been a 130,000 drop in attendances in 3 years, and that can't be overlooked. On the 9 tracks, and it's on page 49 of your accounts, there's substantial losses there. There's substantial losses there. Leaving Shelbourne Park aside, there's substantial losses there. So I would ask you, are they all viable? The tracks that you own, forget the private tracks, but first of all, are the tracks that are in your ownership still viable? Secondly, the support of the other tracks which you financially support, because I know, in fairness, Mr Dollard, you had said to the Irish Times and to other media organisations back in July that that had to be looked at in terms of 17 tracks in Ireland and whether that was too many for the sport. So 1, are the ones that are in your ownership still viable? 2, is the support of the other tracks still a viable proposition? And 3, going back to the accumulation of debt. So obviously, when you were in here last year or whenever it was, in terms of there was an accumulated of in excess of 20 million debt which had been cleared for the sale of Harold's Cross. But if we get to a situation where that decline in both attendances and commercial revenues continues, how soon before accumulated debt from a financial position is going to be a gaping reality for you once again?
Thanks, Deputy. Through the Chair, I suppose just on the business model, and just to say, I mean, the business model is changing, and I fully accept the drop in attendances, but as an example, we run 2 early morning meetings now as part of our new business model. We will never have an attendance of the general public at those meetings. It's quite unlikely. So they are of financial value to the organisation, they're of financial value to the industry, but they don't reflect themselves in attendance. So there is some changes in the business model, and attendances aren't the sole benchmark of the business measurement, is what I would say. Are the tracks that we have all viable? I suppose if you take the tracks from the point of view of the track performance, the tote and the EHS, only Cork and Shelburne Park are viable, all the others are loss makers. If you take it and add in SIS and the income we get from that, Cork, Shelburne Park, Tralee and Youghal are viable, and Mullingar would be making its way into viability. And if you take prize money, which we pay, well, then no track is viable. That's, I suppose, the short summary.
Okay. So in trying to address that, because obviously, and I go back to the opening point in terms of taking all your sources of income and the commercial revenue streams, which for many sporting organisations are starting to actually supersede, in one respect, attendance as well, and trying to take those in. And from your position in trying to make the sport a viable proposition again on a sound financial footing, obviously the loss of commercial revenue streams after the expose, I want to touch on those for a second. You said that the 3 companies, which are Barry's Tea, FBD Insurance and Connolly's Red Mills, it was only €10,000 for the 3 of those together. Is that correct?
I wasn't including Red Mills. Red Mills have indicated they're not sponsoring greyhound racing. This is their public statement, but they are putting their money into the Care and Welfare Fund. So,
okay, so Barry's Tea and FBD Insurance combined was a loss of €10,000.
Sorry, the 3 that publicly have been in the media: Barry's Tea, FBD and Tracy's in Wexford. Okay.
So in terms of boosting commercial revenues, because obviously, I mean, €10,000 is not a lot of money, okay? There's junior GA teams with shirt sponsorship of that magnitude, and it is a difficult period then for you to attract new commercial. And I know that you've admitted fully that you're having difficult conversations with sponsors. Where's the future in terms of attracting major sponsor titles to Board Nagan at this moment in time?
Yeah, to the Chair, I mean, obviously it is a challenge. I think sponsors will need to be convinced that the care and welfare issues are being addressed. Since August, we have agreed with our sponsors that 50% of all sponsorship goes directly into the Care and Welfare Fund, and sponsors have been very happy in relation to that. So I think we can positively engage with sponsors and convince them that the industry, which it is serious about care and welfare. On commercial revenue streams, and again, we can go through this in a bit more detail, but while our on-track toll performance might be declining, there is significant improvement in our international toll performance and in the sale of media rights to the SIS Sports Information Services platform.
Okay, well, I mean, that, again, and that is a huge, but that's maybe masking over, again, going back to the actual, how the general public take the sport to its heart. And on that point, you mentioned that your public relations outfit are going to be starting in terms of the Christmas market, which is already well underway. How has that been hit in the context of, say, major companies who would book the likes of Shelburne Park for Christmas events and using that and being associated with the industry again? How is that shaping up?
Yeah, again, to the Chair, it's a bit early to say. We launched our Christmas programme, I think the first week of September, which was the earliest we have launched it. So I think the next month, 6 weeks, will give an indication of the response to that programme. So it's a bit early to say as to what the impact might be. Okay,
and I just, again, go back to the performance of the 9. I'll finish with this. The performance of the 9 tracks, and you said in terms of if you look at them in terms of in the whole, the viability is very questionable. How, if you're looking at your projections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, and the losses that are being incurred, and if that is not arrested and stopped, what kind of financial position are you going to be in 5 years from now, given the decline in attendances, given the decline in commercial revenue streams? given the non-financial viability of some of the tracks, a large portion of the tracks, where is the accumulated deficit going to be? Because you've obviously taken the money from Harold's Cross to clear the debt. You've used some of it to improve the stadia around the country as well. But if that is not arrested, how quickly would the accumulated deficit come back on the books again?
To the Chair, I suppose that's trying to look into the future. If I could say again, Indecon, I expect will give recommendations as to the immediate future and what might need to be done. And I suppose while we can measure a lot of things on financial viability, I don't think we should forget the social, cultural and heritage aspects of greyhound racing.
No, I certainly would.
There's a value attached
for any sporting organisation, but unfortunately what we're discussing here today is the subvention of 16.8 million from the Exchequer, and that is a viable question to be asked in terms of whether you equate 16.8 million as the requisite sum for the sporting and cultural survival of the greyhound industry. That's the fair question to ask. That's the fair question to ask. Yeah. So my point is, there cannot be a bailout continuing whereby in the last 2 years we've had to prop it up by 2 million extra to make sure you survive. So there is a huge onus on yourself as CEO and the board to make sure that the industry starts to wash its face beyond what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, to the Chair, I mean, absolutely, that is a very valid question. I suppose our approach, again, Indecon will give an assessment of the stadia footprint. We have been managing our costs. I mentioned the reduction in payroll earlier on. We will continue to manage our costs. And yes, viability, we have to have a continuous eye on that and I suppose cut our cloth to suit our measure. Absolutely.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Deputy Cassells.